Get ready to hear something good about cannabis. Nurse Heather brings her eternal optimism and professional expertise to the stories of the day, discussing current topics and events, making life's lemons into sweet lemonade, and sharing a tall glass with guests, friends, and her listeners. CannabisRadio.com is happy to present Good News with Nurse Heather, the show infused with compassion and love.
From high atop Mount Soledad in beautiful San Diego, California, 100 feet above sea level. Morning, this is Canna Kenny, and I'm presenting Good News with Cannabis Nurse Heather. She's our hostess with the mostest, a certified cannabis nurse and a board member for the American Cannabis Nurses Association. And we bring to you the best news in the world relating to cannabis. And today we have a very exciting program with the one and only Max Montrose, who's the president of the Trichome Institute. They make training tools and textbooks for bud tenders, who I sometimes refer to as personal service representatives. And we recently had a visit to Denver, Colorado, and I had a chance to get a glimpse of this beautiful publication that Max has put out, and I refer to it simply as the Bible. It's transforming cannabis education. And Nurse Heather and I were in Denver for 2 of the last 3 weeks. Nurse Heather, did you have a chance to see some new and exciting things in the world of the cannabis industry?
Oh my goodness, did I, Kenny? You were there with me. Max was there. He knows. Last week or the week before, we were doing the NCIA summit, and that entire week there were multiple things going on. I know we saw Max at the Students for Sensible Drug Policy fundraiser that was put on by I Comply, and that was, you know, Kenny, we kind of kicked butt and cleaned house when it came to the drawing. We really got things started there, and we won about 3/4 of the drawing prizes. So that was kind of fun. But we always get to see our friends when we go to those things. And Max was there, and he had his setup from Trichome Institute with all of his tools. And then we were there again this last week, and we got to see Max again. So I feel pretty blessed and lucky because we're getting to spend so much time with wonderful friends in the industry. So I'm excited about our show today.
Well, Nurse Heather, I got to say my head is exploding. I mean, you asked me to comment on this show about exciting things that are happening in the world of cannabis from the legal side of it, and we'll bring Max into this in a minute. But my gosh, we're now looking at 38 states that have some form of legal cannabis. We just had a Texas subcommittee that actually voted out of committee an adult legal program, again, on the basis of the Genesis 1:29, behold, that God gives us all of these plants and these beautiful plants, among them cannabis. We have now 3 territories, including the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I must tell you that I've just finished the final draft for their new law for a medical cannabis program. And in light of all these amazing things that are going on in the world, it's time that we had an amazing product out there to train, teach, and educate everyone about this beautiful plant, cannabis. And that's Max Montrose, president of Trichome Institute. Good morning, Max.
Hey, thanks so much, guys, for having me on the show. And, of course, it's always a pleasure running into you both every time you're out here, because you guys not only are, so helpful in being serious with cannabis education and spreading the information, but you guys are also super fun to hang out with.
Don't tell anyone, Max.
All right, I won't tell anyone those secrets from last weekend. But okay. Yeah, but you guys are awesome. So always a pleasure to talk with you guys. So thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for being here. Max, you're a Colorado native, and you've been on the front lines of this cannabis legalization movement from the beginning, I guess. You have quite a history. Can you give our listeners just maybe the short version of how you arrived in this space as a cannabis expert?
Sure. I started self-medicating with cannabis in my younger teen years and discovered how helpful it was for me, and just became fascinated by cannabis everything and just started researching it relentlessly in high school and then also all the way through college. And I made it a point to every college course I ever took, I applied cannabis to it somehow, some way. And became very active in activism and policy and legislation around 2008 and was pretty serious in the marijuana movement in terms of, I guess, activism as a whole. I feel blessed to have experienced what cannabis was like being completely illegal to the medicalization of it, which was completely unregulated, and what that looked like during those dispensary days, all the way up until now, where we have marijuana police and badges, and it's a serious industry. And so it's been cool to kind of be a part of it the whole time. But the whole time I've been a part of it, I haven't done just one thing. And so I've managed multiple dispensaries, multiple grows, a lot of infusions, extractions, working in the THC labs. And then now within all of that, I do my cannabis education nationally.
So you've done all of these things. You've been in the industry A to Z. What is your favorite job in the industry since you've done it all?
My absolute favorite job is teaching people, because there is so much to learn about cannabis that people are so unaware of, that people don't even know what questions to ask. And so I absolutely love standing up in front of a crowd of 100 people and just being an available source for people to get their very complicated questions finally answered. Because for all of the mothers and fathers who have children that watch these Sanjay Gupta CNN episodes, and they, learn about Charlotte's Web and feel like they have to move to Colorado just to save their child's life, it makes me just like glow with joy to be able to explain to them what Charlotte's Web is as a name brand and how they can access similar medicines without having to uproot themselves. And so any way I can teach someone how to grow the plant better, or how to observe the plant, or what the laws are, is what I love to do.
And I kind of felt, Max, when I started the first dispensary in Arizona, we opened the third dispensary there. And that was one of the first, for our beautiful listeners who are out there, that was one of the first very regulated systems that they had. And the requirements of that system called out for training for all aspects of our business. And we focused and spent a lot of time in doing that, and we were very proud of what we did. But now that I've had a chance to review, I think when we were in Denver, I had a chance to look through some of the material that you have for 20 to 30 minutes. It just blew me away. I mean, you have encapsulated really the whole soul and heart and thought that goes into everything about our beautiful plant. And how did you do this? I mean, the writing is amazing. It's for our listeners out there, it describes all of the specific functions within the industry, the training that's required, the plant. I mean, it's such a huge undertaking. I mean, how did you do it?
So there's a few really serious problems in the cannabis industry that need to be solved sooner than later. And one of the number one issues is the complete lack of cannabis education.
Hear, hear.
And so there are 50 cannabis schools in the U.S., so you think there's a ton of cannabis education. The problem is that a lot of these schools that teach bud tender certification courses have never been bud tenders. And a lot of these courses talk about a lot of legal things, scientific things, and serious medical things. Most bud tenders, even most people who own edible facilities in the cannabis industry, have no idea that what they produce is a different drug than smoked flower. And they don't understand how to explain to people why edibles and smoked flower are two different psychoactive substances. And so within all the training programs that exist currently, as far as I'm aware, nobody's curriculum has been reviewed and confirmed by an expert in the fields of cannabis law, medicine, and science, except for my textbook. And so the guys who legalized cannabis, Vincente Cederberg, they did the complete legal review on my book, and I have famous scientists from Germany, Switzerland, Israel, all contributing to, cannabinoid pharmacokinetic pharmacology. But what I've done is applied that science and that complicated jargon into the everyday industry that I grew up in as a bud tender. And so what my textbook can do is it can tell people, if you take a tincture or cannabis sublingually, here's the time to effect, here's what it's going to do to you based on this particular tolerant level. Here's how you gauge someone's tolerant level, and here's how you talk to a customer about that, and here's how much you can sell them. And so it's a very well-rounded book, but there's about 4 different textbooks within that one textbook.
Hey, let our listeners know, I have the Trichome Institute, Trichome Institute. Just Google that, and they can get to your website. Yeah,
and so our textbook doesn't come out for a few more months, but you can definitely, if you go to trichomeinstitute.com, you can take a peek at some of the textbooks and what's in them if you click on some of the products like the weed wheel or the interpening loop in the shop, and you can see what some of those textbooks will look like when they start to come out. But right now what we have available is the interpening certification course, the textbook for that, the guidebook, and the 2 tools that go into that. And that's a whole different ball game from the textbook itself.
Beautiful. We're going to take our first break this morning. To our beautiful listeners, we'll be back right after a few messages. Back with cannabis nurse Heather and Max Montrose, president of Trichome Institute.
Good News with Nurse Heather will return, but first, let's show some love to our sponsors.
Ganjapreneur.com, your guide to the cannabis business world. Ganjapreneur.com is a comprehensive resource for cannabis professionals and entrepreneurs. Download the Ganjapreneur app on your smartphone or tablet to catch up on cannabis industry news, scroll through our daily job listings, and learn about successful cannabis companies, executives, and investors. Ganjapreneur.com, helping Ganjapreneurs grow.
Great websites today need expert web design and development and need to be e-commerce ready and mobile friendly. But building a marketable and profitable website can be an uphill climb. Ready to make your new website or replace your existing website? Think Orange as the new way to get in the black. Orange Hill Development works with Fortune 500 companies and offer the same top quality development service at a fraction of what other providers charge. Brands like Absolute, Carlsberg, and Nestea trust Orange Hill Development. Find out why you should trust your website with Orange Hill. Contact Orange Hill for a consultation today at orangehilldevelopment.com.
The smoke is rising, and the next crop of podcasts devoted to cannabis providers and enthusiasts are ready to be harvested. Welcome to the Cannabis Radio Network, founded by respected rainmakers who have been producing award-winning podcasts for over a decade. Industry headlines, business updates, medical reports, marketing, and e-commerce education rolled up perfectly for your consumption. Let's grow together. The Cannabis Radio Network. CannabisRadio.com.
Nurse Heather is back to spread some more good news, only on CannabisRadio.com.
We're back with good news with cannabis nurse Heather and our very special guest, Max Montrose, who's the president of the Trichome Institute. And Max has recently completed, or is very close on the verge of completing, really the Bible when it comes to everything and anything that relates to cannabis, especially information not only for the professionals who work in the industry and experts, but really for the general public. Nurse Heather?
Yeah, Max, cannabis training has been an afterthought for the most part in this industry. And it appears that over the last year or two, cannabis education has become the new hot product. Why do you feel that it's important to provide this information to the masses?
Oh, that's a very good question. When I stand up in front of a room full of bud tenders who I'm about to lecture, I try to paint a picture. And what that picture is, you could look at bud tending in the whole cannabis industry in 2 different ways. One, you could just say, you're getting paid $10 an hour to sell small sacks of weed to people, and that's it. Or you could look at it and say, the medicine I serve this person could change their life forever. And the police, for the marijuana police, are actually trying to arrest me and shut down my dispensary by doing a sting operation to see if I properly check an ID. So I could go to jail for my job. Or if you give somebody an edible who has a zero tolerance, who flew into Denver, Colorado from Oklahoma, and they have no idea what 100 milligrams mean, and you didn't explain that to them, you could send someone to the hospital. And so I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm just saying that there is this seriousness of bud tending that a lot of people tend to forget. And the fact that the cannabis products that people sell, it just dumbfounds me how much they don't know about them. And so if you asked any bud tender, you know, if you say, I have PTSD, which means I suffer from these thoughts that I'm trying to get away from, and I'd like to try medical cannabis, a bud tender might not have been educated that you should strive for an indica before a sativa because it causes paranoia. And so if you don't educate bud tenders, you could be serving people things that would be bad for them to ingest. And so,
well, and to take that a step further as well, you know, there's also in medicine, we see a paradoxical effect. So, you know, you can give Benadryl to one child who will go to sleep and sleep for a long, long time because it made them drowsy, where you can give Benadryl to another child that will be bouncing off the walls. We see this in cannabis as well. A PTSD patient typically, as you said, will lean toward an indica or a indica dominant hybrid. But on the flip side, there are some patients who have a paradoxical effect, and they actually will experience some anxiety or mind racing from an indica, and they prefer a sativa. Do you incorporate that in your training as well?
110%. And what we incorporate within that training is we have a chapter in our textbook called the experimental phase, where we teach bud tenders how to serve a gram of sativa, indica, and a hybrid, and then allow the patient to document their experience on the different variety types at different times of day to see what work with them for exactly the reason you just described, Nurse Heather. So definitely we cover that. The other issue that I would like to point out, though, is let's say that the patient goes and asks for an indica because they have PTSD, and the indica bud that a bud tender served them just so happens to be a sativa. Mm-hmm. And so that's the whole point of interpreting, is all of a sudden now patient goes to leafly.com, okay, which is the biggest atrocity in the cannabis industry when it comes to like information. And so someone's going to be like, oh my God, you know, I need this Bubba Kush. And then the jar is going to say Bubba Kush. And then, you know, what you forgot is that Bubba Kush came from Craigslist from someone's basement 4 years ago before cannabis was legal. And it's not Bubba Kush. It's some lemon diesel. It just has the word Bubba Kush on it. And because nobody knows how to see and smell the difference between indica variety types, this is why patients are getting confused. And so, you know, maybe you're right, Nurse Heather. Maybe an indica is better for PTSD, but maybe the indica is actually a sativa. And how do you know? And so that's the whole program of interpreting, is teaching people to just forget the name. Just don't even, the name is the thing that matters the least. Don't go to leafly.com and research a strain. It's not going to be whatever you find in your store. Learn how to see and smell the difference between the cola, bud structure, and the terpenoid ratios to gauge the effect.
So that reminds me of when we were up, Nurse Heather and I were in a collective up in Santa Cruz, Max, and we get in there, and it was just, you know, your typical collective as you'd find in Santa Cruz, California, and we asked the bud tenders there, is this a medical cannabis place? And the guy goes, yeah, man, we're totally medical, dude. But the thing...
Totally medical, dude. That's what he told us. You know, Max, as a home health nurse, the other nurses used to tease me because I'd have my little medicine pouch, and in there I had aromatherapy bottles of different aromatherapies. And I would use this with all of my patients. And I would use different ones for different patients for different reasons. But I really love what you're talking about with this terpening, because you're interpreting terpenes. And I'd love for you to just tell our listeners a little bit more about terpening and, you know, what are some of those techniques with, I know you're smelling things in different areas of the nose and whatnot.
Sure. So the best way to describe this is to compare it to a sommelier. And so wine sommeliers can take one sip of wine and tell you what part of the world these grapes grew in, what the weather pattern was that year, the acidity or the tannin to it. There's so much scientific information you can get from tasting and smelling something. And so what we're doing is we're applying that same methodology to cannabis and backing it up with some science. And so what the truth is interpening means to interpret the terpenes in conjunction with the biological bud structure based on original geography. And we look at hybridization within that so that we can gauge hybridization. But essentially, what most people don't know is the difference between indica and sativa has nothing to do with cannabinoids. Both indica and sativa, if you get like a hardcore Bubba Kush and let's say a hardcore Lemon Diesel or Golden Goat, and you go get them tested at a high pressure liquid chromatography, whatever, and they both come up 22% THC and they both come up 3% CBD, right? Then why do they make you feel so different? And the difference is the terpenes. The terpenes are the difference between variety types. And so terpenes have a pharmacological value themselves. There's over 20,000 registered terpenes in the world, and we're very aware of over 200 within cannabis. And on any given sample, there's probably going to be around 60 different types. But, you know, if I smell a bud and I can smell a thick amount of myrcene and linalool towards the bottom of my nose, and the bud structure is really round and dense, it's an indica. And I can tell you it's an indica because the nodal spacing on the branch dictated by the original landrace geography of how cannabis plants grow, I can show you why the shape of that bud would come from a shape of that plant from that part of the world where we know the effect comes from. But also, linalool is the smell of lavender. And the pharmacological value of lavender within aromatherapy is a sedative, the same way it is on cannabis, because it's the same live hydrocarbon chain and the same molecular structure. And same thing with myrcene. Myrcene is also a sedative, and myrcene also helps THC cross the blood-brain barrier at twice the rate. So if I can smell these particular scents, and I know that these scents value produce this effect in conjunction with that bud structure, I can see and smell the difference between indica and sativa. And that's what we teach people how to do. And we have these really easy tools, the weed wheel, the interpening loop, and the interpening guide that you can buy at TrichomeInstitute.com that will walk you through this process yourself. And last weekend, we just did our first certification for level 2 interpeners. And out of 30 people who tested, we now have 10 people who passed the test, and they can see and smell the difference between indica and sativa, but also they can detect the different species of mold and bugs and funguses, and if the bud is unflushed or has male flower sites. So quality control is a big part of interpening as well.
Wow, man, I'm blown away. That is awesome. And you got to meet our Senator Positive, did you not, Max?
You know, I hung out with him a little bit, but I don't think he and I connected the way maybe we should have.
Well, I'll put this the way the Senator...
We just didn't really get down to it.
I'll put this the way the senator would, and tell me if we're on the same track. But as the senator might say, you got to smell to tell.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, Kenny? I smell a break coming on, but you got to smell to tell that.
All right. So our beautiful listeners will be back in just a few minutes after some important messages with good news with cannabis nurse Heather and our very special, amazing guest, Max Montrose.
Good News with Nurse Heather will return, but first, let's show some love to our sponsors.
Your connection to quality cannabis insurance services is spelled K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R. That's Karcher Insurance. We have worked with ventures like cannabis for over 60 years. We're proud to represent over 50 companies with tailor-made cannabis plans for owners just like you to insure your product, your plants, and your pursuits. K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R spells out their full-service insurance services ranging from commercial to bonds to personal, from life to health, and more. Contact the team at KarcherInsurance.com and let our experience work for you. That's K-A-E-R-C-H-E-R Insurance.com.
Contact Karen and the team at Karcher Insurance at 1-844-421-3560. That's 844-421-3560. Educator, author, and advocate Dr. Mitch Earlywine is here to tackle the burning issues.
And I'm here to clear up the myths about cannabis and burn them away with science.
CannabisRadio.com presents a no-holds-barred platform that seeks to redefine and revolutionize the entire scope of the cannabis culture while opening the door for more to join the cannabis crusade.
Dr. Kevin Hill.
You can't ignore the fact that, like alcohol, most people who use don't have a problem. So I think that you need to think about policy in that way while educating people properly about marijuana. I think that's the way to go.
Burning Issues, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Ignite the conversation on some trending topics along the Cannabis Radio social media network. Join our crew of thousands on our Cannabis Radio page on Facebook or at Canna Radio, CANNA Radio on Twitter. Plus, look for our Facebook and Google Plus pages for all of our original programs and connect with Dr. Dina, Kyle Cushman, Dr. Mitch Earlywine, Nurse Heather, Doc Rob, the hosts of Ganjapreneur, and more. Connect with the growing Cannabis Radio social crusade at Canna Radio on Twitter or search for Cannabis Radio on Facebook, Google Plus, and Instagram and grow with us.
Nurse Heather is back to spread some more good news, only on CannabisRadio.com.
We're back, beautiful listeners, with good news with Cannabis Nurse Heather and our very special guest, Max Montrose, the president of Trichome Institute, who has been telling us about some amazing work that he's been doing in educating or re-educating the entire cannabis world about the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Right, Nurse Heather?
That's right. That's right. You know, Max, I'm curious to know, what changes are you actually seeing in the patient customer service from your efforts to actually educate bud tenders and dispensary workers? What are you seeing the difference that it's making?
Well, it's making a huge difference because all of a sudden you now have an ability to understand the bud in front of you without having to guess. And so if you know AK-47 is an indica, because it should be, but your AK-47 bud is labeled as sativa, then bud tenders can actually, after understanding and terpening, simply tell the customer, that's just what we call that bud. We just so happen to call it AK-47, but really it's a sativa and it works this way, and here's how I know. And this is how it's going to affect you. Instead of this whole kind of just guessing game. So that's good, but also bud tenders are becoming paid more after taking an interpreting course because they're showing their bosses that they are now becoming cannabis experts and can really help the patients even more. And so this interpreting thing is starting to catch on between dispensaries here in Colorado. And I've even heard that the THC Cup is only accepting level 2 interpreters to be their flower judges this year.
Wow.
So there's lots of things moving forward in terms of the validity of really breaking down cannabis to a science and also artistically.
Well, and you know, you're right. This terpene, I'm kind of on this kick of terpenes right now, and Kenny and I are going to be in Seattle for the Terp Festival, and this is a festival where we will be celebrating terpenes and really doing what it is that you're talking about, this terpening, interpreting terpenes, and really giving credit to these terpenes. You know, Ethan Russo he was one of the founders of GW Pharmaceuticals, and he's recently left that organization and has created a new company that is looking at terpenes and terpenes from other plant sources, even other than cannabis, terpenes from other plant sources that will support the endocannabinoid system. What do you know about this, Max? What do you know about other plant terpenes that support the endocannabinoid system? Have you heard any of this talk and jargon?
Sure, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about stoner legend. So there's some stoner legend that if you eat a mango, dude, you'll be so much higher. And what's funny is it's true.
I tried it. It's true.
And the reason why it's true is it's not the D-limonene that you would expect from the citrus from the mango. It's actually the myrcene in the mango that's helping the Delta-9 cross the blood-brain barrier better. And so cannabis has a healthy amount of myrcene in it, but so do other plants, such as cannabis's little brother or homeboy or cousin, Cannabaceae humulus lupulus, which is hops. And so that's got a healthy amount of myrcene too. So the point is...
Wait, stop just a second. Go back. I want to hear you say that again. Can you say that again? Hops.
Cannabaceae humulus lupulus? Or what part?
Yeah, that part.
Yeah, that
say
part.
One more time.
Cannabaceae.
It's not a dreaded social disease.
No.
No, I like it. I like the way he says it. It makes me feel like, my terpener is working fully.
Well, and you know what's crazy? What's crazy cool about hops? Besides that beer and wheat are cousins, and they're my two favorite things and go well together, is that hops also produces a healthy amount of CBD.
Right.
Did you know that?
I knew that.
And so, so there's a variety of plants out there that produce these fantastic things. And so one thing that's interesting is how many of these companies, these vape pen companies, what they're doing is they're actually resourcing gallons of terpenes from other countries that are derived from other plants and reintroducing that into a cannabinoidal conglomerate or hash oil. And what they're doing is they're using it for a few purposes. One, to flavor the hash oil, and two, to make it more viscous to hit the atomizers so you don't have to utilize polyethylene glycol as much. But I need to play around with this stuff a little more. Some companies are producing things that I'm curious about, and other companies are producing things that I just would put in the trash.
And I think you'd probably agree that it's so important, especially in the way we have the cannabis, the way it is provided to the consumer now, is that unlike a pharmaceutical where a doctor is following a patient, a doctor is giving a recommendation, and then the rest of the system is fundamentally dependent upon the information that's provided really at the dispensary level. And that's the amazing thing and the difference between the work that you've put out, which I refer to, Max, as the Bible, and everything else. That's how important it is. You're educating the folks who have to then educate.
Yeah, you've been a wealth of information today, Max. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your knowledge and love with Kenny and I and our listeners, and we'd love to have you back again sometime.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, guys. And when we get off the show, let's talk about this Terp Festival.
You're awesome. We'll see you there, brother.
All right.
Thank you,
guys
beautiful
later.
Listeners. Thank you, man.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you for being with us, and thank you, beautiful cannabis nurse Heather. Thank you for joining us, listeners, for this edition of Good News with Cannabis Nurse Heather. You can download past episodes of our program by going to CannabisRadio.com or subscribing to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and very soon on iHeartRadio. Also, you can follow the show on Facebook and Google+. We'll see you next time from Mount Soledad in San Diego, California. This is Good News with Cannabis Nurse Heather. I'm Kenny. We'll see you around the bend.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast or redistribution without proper consent of CannabisRadio.com is prohibited.